Hello.
Hello.
Good morning.
Morning. So now the question is, why isn't my camera on?
These mysterious TikTok questions, they bedevil us.
Oh, wait. Oh, my God. There's,
Hello!
hi. There's nothing like being like one of the oldest people on TikTok.
Oh, come on now. There's that very old, like, great grandma who always does, like, a fit check before she goes to her husband's gravestone.
Oh, yes. Yes. I've been following her. She's moved into a nursing home. We're going to get the whole ride, everyone.
We're getting the arc. We're getting the
Yeah.
arc of a life. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. I'm surprised. I mean, yesterday was the second anniversary of the book coming out. It's also my son's birthday.
Oh,
he,
wow.
he turned 7. So when they told me that was the publication date, I was like, oh, that's been a lucky day for me before. So I felt good about that as a publication date.
That is incredible. So multiple birthdays.
Multiple birthdays. He's the only one who got a cake. But it was good.
Well, that's so funny that you say that because one of the questions that I had for you that I'll just like ask as a starter is being a dad and people often compare writing a book to having a kid, which I think
Yeah.
is kind of bullshit sounding to me a little bit, but
Well, you
like
can put a book down for several months.
right, yeah, you don't have that constant responsibility. Like what is more difficult, being a dad to a recently turned 7-year old or writing a book?
It's. I mean, they're different. Like, okay, so being a dad, you can't put it down. There's no stopping, but you get an awful lot of help. I mean, other people will help you raise this child. No one else is going to write the book for you. So you're all on your own, but you are on your own timeline. I recommend both. I think they're both fun.
Yeah.
I think the sort of the fear and look out, those first 2 years with the baby or how tough it is with the book. I think in both cases, they can be oversold. They are tough, but a lot of people have done it and figured it out, and so can you.
Yeah, I mean, there's literally millions and millions of books, and there have been billions of children on the
Yeah.
planet. So
Yeah.
how hard could it possibly be? But I think that the key is writing a good book,
Yeah.
raising a good kid. So
And in many ways, you won't know either one for years and years to come.
well, so like, I'm like, did you know? I mean, like, not to like give you too big of a head, but did you know that you were writing like a particularly good book? Can you tell when you're writing? Like, I think this is pretty good.
I know that the story's holding together, and I know that I like it.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily have a lot of faith that a lot of other people will like what I like. I knew that I was entertained and I was amused. I thought the book would go straight to paperback, and I thought it would kind of go on like the LGBTQIA plus indie book circuit.
Yeah.
I thought it'll do great in Palm Springs. I'll see you at the Castro. I mean, like those were the spots that they, sell it in Barnes and Nobles in the middle of the country. I did not see that coming. The New York Times review, I didn't think they'd pay attention to little old me in this little old book. So
Yeah.
those are the surprises. I thought it was good, but I also worked enough. I work in television, and I've worked enough in entertainment and the arts to know that good doesn't mean you're going to get an audience.
Yeah, I mean, like, I'm sure there's literally millions of people who have had the best stories that anyone could ever read or see, and they never got told because they never got that attention. I mean, and honestly, I don't think I knew you before I read your book, and it 100% was the cover. I saw the cover in a Barnes and Noble, and I'm like, that's a really provocative
Oh
cover.
wow,
I gotta
I
pick that
love
up.
that. Barnes and
Yeah.
Noble's got you. That's where they.
And I don't even think it was out in a Pride section or anything. I don't know. I don't even remember where it was, but it was just like such an arresting cover. I'm like, God, I gotta like read the back of this. So whoever did the cover for you, like that was like aces.
I no, they're great. The cover, I love the cover. So I'm a television drama writer, and I was working on the pilot of Bel Air, and we were shooting the pilot in Philadelphia, and we had like a 6 a.m. call time. So I got up at 5 a.m. and there was an email from my editor, Nachi Nieto, at Flatiron, and it was the cover art, and it was this cover, and I was like crying in bed. I was like,
Oh, that's amazing.
this is perfect. She told me later that when she'd gone to the art department and given them some key words about this cover, She had mentioned cruising, and they gave her a cover with a bicycle on it.
It's that cultural context that sometimes isn't there.
Yeah. Like, okay, not quite, guys. Close, not quite. I
Not,
think your head is no.
Trey was a bike messenger.
What's a bike messenger?
So,
Yeah.
so something that I was thinking about when you mentioned the second anniversary of this book was coming out, thinking about like what I wanted to ask you about is My Government Means to Kill Me. It's a great piece of fiction. It's a great novel, but it's also, I think, like a vital historical lifeline for younger queer people today, and with like scare quotes around it, younger, like actually young people,
Yeah.
or younger as in people who are finding out that they're queer, and they don't have access to history because queerness doesn't have the same kind of elder kinship relationships that other types of culture have.
We lost a lot of those people.
We lost a lot of those people. So how did you feel like any weight of responsibility for telling those stories in this book when you were writing it? Was that on your mind at all
Oh
when you
yes,
were like,
it was on my mind, and it was a great fear.
yeah,
I wanted to sort of get that flavor right. I wanted to be able to tell that history in a way with some sort of candor and the urgency that it held then. It dawned on me that like a lot of really young people, they know grinder culture. They don't know bathhouse culture.
yeah,
They may know who Larry Kramer is. They know but they don't know much about his personality. And this isn't history that we are teaching in schools in any way, shape, or form, really. And so it's just sort of, we've just sort of left it to popular movies to sort of fill in the gaps. And so I wanted that. I wanted to take that on. I was very nervous about it. I mean, under the best of circumstances, when you were talking about New York in the past, people who lived through it love to tell you how you don't know what it was like.
mm-hmm.
You talk about New York in the 70s, you're already up against sort of a mountain of skepticism. So to sort of dig into this, I did find myself very worried how the people who actually lived through this, who were in ACT UP, would feel about it. And this past March, I did a reading in New York for Sarah Schulman, who did this book over my shoulder, Let the Record Show, which is a political history of ACT UP. It's great. It's wonderful. Everybody should read it. And she was holding this event, and so there were a lot of ACT UP people there. And it was very heartwarming and a little overwhelming. The number of them who were just happy that this history was being revisited and that this story was being told, because a lot of them had felt like people just sort of forgot about it.
How much research did you do to like get that stuff right versus you just kind of, you knew it from not that you lived through all of this, but you knew it through like oral history or popular media? Like, how much did you dig into things to try to get things right?
I discovered that I've been digging into it my entire life. I mean, that's one of the things that drew me to this. Was from the jump, I had already read all these books and seen these documentaries and known people and talked to people. And I'd sort of been versed in sort of the history of ACT UP and the fight against AIDS because I grew up in the immediate sort of shadow of those events. I mean, I tell people it's not enough to have talent. You kind of have to know the range of your talent. If I had to write about, a political court intrigue during the reign of King James, I would be starting from next to zero.
Right.
I was already sort of, pretty well versed in a lot of ways. And so I did do a lot of research to sort of make sure I got things sharp. The thing I discovered was there were just a lot of holes in the research where it was like, okay, I've gotta fill in the gaps. One of the things, I mean, this is what's great about doing historical fiction. You've got these real events that are markers that you're going to get to. And you almost feel like, well, when I get to the marker of what's real, it's downhill skiing. It's easy, right? Because I've got all this material and I've just got to edit. And one of those things is Larry Kramer gave this speech that it wasn't necessarily the start of ACT UP, but ACT UP did organize like 3 days later. And it was a really rousing speech. And I'd heard for years about the front part of that speech. And so I just assumed when I got there, I would find the rest of it. And I couldn't. I mean, I had that front part. And then I'm sitting here going,
Really?
well, I guess I've got to write it. I guess I've got to go in here and put this together in a way that I think it would go. But it goes to show that at that moment, not Larry, not anyone really there, they didn't think it was going to be all that important. Larry gave a lot of speeches.
Yeah.
They didn't know what was going to happen 3 days later. We didn't have phones. We didn't have the recording devices we had. So a lot of times in the history, there are gaps.
Did you always think of writing this as a novel, or was there at any point when you were thinking that it would be more of a history?
I thought of it as a novel. I thought that's what I could add to it. I like research, but I'm not Sarah Schulman. I'm not Jack Lowry, who did It Was Beautiful, It Was Vulgar. I mean, those are great nonfiction books about this era and about these people, and I relied on those things. But my power is in sort of like creating characters, grounding them in emotion, and putting you in the skin of somebody who's sort of out there in the world. So that's what I wanted to bring to it in fiction.
Well, I mean, it brings a truth that a piece of nonfiction can't, right? Where you can see that first person perspective of someone who's actually going through this. I appreciate, like, I'm glad that a book like this was popular and is well received, and it has like real characters in it, like flawed people that we don't have to have like, oh, all of our gay heroes up on a pedestal and they were all so perfect and just like porcelain, and like that, you know, when everyone is like, you know, not like, that's not how anyone is.
Well, I think the further we get from an event, the more truthful we can be.
Right.
I mean, right, like in the immediate aftermath, you're trying to be respectful. There's a certain narrative we're selling politically. So you're editing a lot of inconvenient truths out of the narrative. But I mean, this happens in all our families, you know?
Totally.
I mean, right, like what you hear immediately after the separation isn't what we're saying 10 years later, and isn't what we're saying at the wake when they're both in the ground. I mean, the further you get away, the more honest we can be.
Right. Well, and then there's also the, like, I can talk shit about my family, but you can't as well. Mm-hmm. Where, like, I would trust you to write something like this, but I wouldn't trust anybody to write something like this.
And part of it, and this is where, I mean, I'm not a very autobiographical writer in the sense that, like, I mean, I love Trey, but Trey is not me. There's not a lot.
You went to Georgetown.
Yeah, I took
no disrespect, but Trey is very different.
Yeah, I took that offer. I was like, let's go. I'm out of here. Yeah. But there are things I have had experience with. I worked in nonprofits for years, and one of them was a nonprofit called Grandma's House in DC, and it was a group home for children who were HIV positive or living with AIDS. And when I tell you, like, the Angie of this book, I met 3 or 4 Angies in that world.
Yeah.
People who were on the front line doing tremendous work under extraordinary pressure, and yet had a sharpness to them, a fierceness to them that would flash up at a moment's notice. And, you know, whatever in my personality, I respected that and I loved it.
Something that I was thinking about today is in your book, Trey learns, like, at the bathhouse, like, he had, I just love that it's Bayard Rustin that he learned. That's such a bold choice, by the way. Sorry, since I brought it up, how did you decide that you're going to have not a real historical figure, but also, like, an extremely famous, notable historical figure?
I mean, you back into these decisions. So, like,
okay.
I want to write a political coming of age story about somebody. And so for example, Larry Kramer, you're not gonna be able to tell that story without Larry Kramer.
Sure.
Well, you can put in a Larry Kramer substitute, and then you can spend the rest of your life having people go, is that supposed to be Larry Kramer? And then you're sort of like, well, yeah, it is, but I was scared. He was still alive. I didn't want to get in trouble. Or you just sort of go for it.
Yeah.
And with Bayard, I felt liberated for one big reason. He had been arrested for engaging in carnal relations with a couple other men in a car in Pasadena. That had happened. And that was interesting because it suddenly took somebody who's been presented to you as a saintly civil rights figure. And it just reminds you, this is a flesh and blood human being who has needs and hungers and appetites. And I wanted to just bring that to the forefront. It didn't seem outside the character of him. Now, if he had been known to be celibate his whole life, I wouldn't have done it.
Yeah.
But I knew he was an active practicing homosexual. So
Yes.
let's see some of that practice in motion. I met his partner, Walter Nagel, who was with at the end of his life. And we talked about the book and he was on board. He had a few quibbles, but that wasn't one of them. He never said, I can't believe you put him in a bathhouse. He would never do that. Not a word.
Interesting. And that's great that you had access like that to like run that, but that there's still time and still some people who are still around who can.
He was much younger than Byer.
Wow.
So that was also in my favor.
Anyway, something that I was thinking about today is if Trey were a real person, he would be in his 50s, something like that at this point. And if people were learning queer history and culture from him today, it might be on TikTok. Like, there really aren't bathhouses anymore in a big way.
I think it's a shame. I mean, I think the conservatives won because they convinced most people that they were a dirty, skeevy, desperate place. And they were, if we called them community centers with playrooms, maybe we'd have done better. But people don't know about how they were the hub for meeting places. Where else, if you wanted to organize this as a queer community, where else would it be safe to meet?
Right.
You know, they would do things like the Continental Baths in New York, which is probably the most famous one. They had like Bette Midler playing in the lounge. That one on New Year's, Christmas Eve, Thanksgiving, they would host dinners for people who didn't have any place to go, who were estranged from their families or alone in the city. So it wasn't just about what happened in the dark room, though I think what happened in the dark room is valid on its own merits, but there was just a lot in terms of community building that happened there. And during the fight for AIDS, wouldn't it have been smart to use those places to disseminate information, testing, protection, as opposed to shutting them down? Those people didn't stop those activities. They just started doing them in places you could no longer reach them.
Yeah, well, I mean, gosh, there's so much to talk about here. I'm reflecting on the monkeypox outbreak like 2 years ago, and you know, even though like bathhouses aren't so much of a scene anymore, like queer people still organize in a pretty significant and quick way on Grindr and in community centers and through, you know, informal networks. And queer people had a much better response to that outbreak than like the U.S. government did with COVID.
Well, we had learned the hard way. Like, okay, this is how we're going to do this. I mean, bathhouses were still going when I was in college in the 90s, you know, way back then.
Way back.
In D.C. And I would say that probably, I'm pretty sure the first place I ever got an HIV test was in a bathhouse, because they would take one of the rooms and have somebody there and say, hey, do you want to get tested? And it would, you know, you'd find out a week later. I mean, those were the days. But it happened there.
Yeah. So I went to school in DC as well.
Wait, where were you?
George Washington. The other George, just down the road. From 2006 to 2009. And like, I would never have gone to a bathhouse at that point. It just like, even though there were clubs that were popular, and then there were also, and I had like a long coming out experience. Like I wasn't even like hooking up with guys until around the time that I graduated.
Do you remember Badlands?
Yeah.
You would go to Badlands? I mean, so my thing was all about, I was broke when I was there.
Big same.
Okay. So Badlands, you'd go and you'd let the doorman hug you up and he'd let you in for free. So that was step one. I was trying not to spend money. What happened with bathhouses is some guy I couldn't take. I was going to Georgetown. It's the oldest Catholic university in the country, so it
Mhm.
wasn't like I was going to bring a hookup back to the dorm. And this guy, for whatever reason, we couldn't go back to his place. And he said, "I know where we can go." And so we went to a bathhouse. Great. And when I suddenly started doing the math, because they would, again, if you were a college student, there were nights they wouldn't charge you,
Yeah.
right? You weren't the customer, you were the chum. And so this, you start thinking, well, wait a minute, no cover charge, no drinks, and it's sort of a very straightforward way to get what I want. So I was a fan.
Yeah.
Economics, it wasn't lust.
Yeah. Well, and then I mean, like my kind of formative hooking up with guys experiences were the early days of Grinder. So like for me, it was hooking up with guys in cars or like an old
Planes,
guy
trains, and automobiles.
plane,
Yeah.
trains, and automobiles, or older gentlemen who are in town somewhere going to a hotel, and which is like, wait, honestly, and I think about that moment in your book where the whole like the bathhouse like saves Trey from that sketchy guy.
Yeah.
I didn't have any kind of protection. I didn't have people. There was no community around me when I was like going to hook up with a guy in a hotel. Like I probably would have been legitimately a lot safer if I had been at a bathhouse instead of that.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean, there were nights where the people who were maybe under the influence of drugs or otherwise disturbed were put out. I mean, there was a self-policing of like, yeah, this we're not going to have this sort of scene going on. And you did feel safe. I mean, I should also, I mean, as you were, I mean, I was a sophomore when Matthew Shepard was killed. And so again, the idea of going out to a club where somebody buys you a drink and you didn't see them pour it or whatever those are, that was really scary to me.
Yeah.
I had friends, God bless them, who no matter how late I got in, would insist that I call them to let them know I got back from clubbing, which I always thought was very sweet. But also I go, what are you going to do if I don't call? I mean, you're going to start the search at 6 a.m. You've got, I
Right.
mean, yeah,
Get the gay posse together.
yeah.
Uh, yeah, I think I didn't realize until just now that we both went to school in the DC area. We'll have to gossip more about that.
I thought that was great. I still love DC. It was also particularly good if you're going to be black and gay. DC is a really good place to start really exploring that. When I came to LA, it was during the age of sort of like the blonde, frosty haired twink. You know, like Justin from Queer as Folk would have been the ideal
Yep.
model, and that is not me. And it probably would have hurt my self esteem if I'd come to Los Angeles immediately.
Yeah.
But I come from DC where, I was a pretty hot number. I was adored. So I at least was like, well, I know this isn't about me.
Yeah.
Something's happening in this scene. I had already built up quite a bit of confidence by the time I got here.
That's awesome. Well, I remember hearing you talk. I don't know, on your TikTok or somewhere before about like how important. Yeah, but I remember hearing you talk about how important it is to like go to a city or go someplace and feel like attractive for the first time. Like I grew up in a village of 700 people. I was like certainly the only gay person there. Or one like there were probably older people who were gay and they were closeted their whole lives. And then coming to a place where there's like people who I find attractive and people who think that I'm attractive, like that is such an important awakening that not everybody even gets to have.
No, it's sad because what ends up happening is you can just chase whatever the mainstream or flavor of the month is, right?
Yeah.
If everybody's into like muscly guys, you're trying to be a muscly guy, or you're trying to get their attention. And you miss out on the fact that for most of us, there is a group who just finds you scrumptious.
Mm-hmm.
But you got to find them. And it may be in a different city. It may be a different race than yours. It may be a different body type than the one you have in mind.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, no, I thought that sort of awakening is really important because it will give you confidence the rest of your life. Like nobody, once you know that there's a group of people who find you attractive, nobody's going to be able to convince you you're ugly again.
Yeah. Yeah. So speaking of cities, you mentioned DC, you mentioned LA. have you lived in New York? Did you spend some time in New York, or did you
I
like? What's your
never, I mean,
experience?
I never lived in New York. I would go all the time when I was in college.
Hmm.
I have a gay uncle who's like 14 years older than me and lived in New York at the time, and so I had a place to stay whenever I got there.
Hmm.
And here's a story for you before 9/11.
Oh boy.
If you were a college student with your college ID, there were two airlines that ran commuter flights from DC to New York every half an hour. And so long as they had an open seat on the plane and you had a student ID, you could buy a ticket for $20.
Wow, that's so European.
I mean, they were like, the plane's going anyway. Why not? $20, let the kid on the plane, and off you went. So,
That's
you know,
incredible.
I mean, if you skip, I mean, now sometimes you'd get stuck. Like there would be, Sunday night was not a great time to try to get back to school
Yeah.
because all the commuters are doing it. But like if you planned it right, it was New York was sort of in our backyard.
I cannot imagine just showing up at the airport and then flashing my G World,
Yeah,
like let me on the plane.
that's all it took.
That's incredible. Yeah, I mean, you
By
take the
way,
train
you
up,
got to
but
the ticket counter with no ticket,
that's crazy.
right? You just walked up to the
crazy.
gate and been like, "Hey, is this flight full?"
A lot of things were different in the past. Bathhouses, you could fly for $20 to New York.
But I went up there a lot, but I was never a New Yorker.
Never, yeah. But you knew it well enough, it has such a like a place in 80s cultural history that.
Oh yeah. I mean everybody knows New York or has a sense of New York even if you don't live there.
Yeah,
It is one of the premier cities of the world. There's no escaping that. And one of the things I was wanting to capture also in this book, which is I would say particularly New York, is because it is so dense and it's so compacted.
hmm
You can get you can't help but rub shoulders with a lot of people, especially in this political world at the time, right?
yeah,
That's, I mean, one of the reasons why I didn't want to necessarily make this a Forrest Gump like story, but there was no way I could imagine Trey being in these circles and not meeting Larry Kramer. I can't imagine him being a gay black activist and not coming to the attention of Bayard Rustin. Like
yeah.
the world really was smaller then. So
I think I maybe even am guilty of having used Forrest Gump as a comparison for your book, but like
I don't mind Forrest Gump. I mean, like, you mean that movie that has endured for decades? That thing, you know.
But the thing that I think that when people compare your book to Forrest Gump, they're talking about what you're just talking about, where it's like there's these real life historical figures and events that happen. But like I feel like Forrest Gump it's kind of like when your phone like takes all of your photos and videos and like makes like a little smash up of it. It's like it's that. There's like Forrest Gump is not a real character. Like on purpose, he's not like a person. He's like an archetype. Whereas Trey is like the opposite of that. Trey is like an actual real person, and it just feels more like it feels so much more real than something like Forrest Gump, which feels like almost like mythological memory,
Yeah.
like remembering the past the way that society remembers the past. Whereas your book is much more like remembering a real, truthy version of the past through fiction.
And I wanted to give you a view into people who were maybe famous that played against what you might have thought of them.
Mm-hmm.
That you might see somebody like Dorothy Cotton, who in the documentaries can come off like everyone's grandma
Mm-hmm.
at the end of her life. And I just want to remind you that she was very fierce, and she took her work very seriously.
Yeah.
And she taught people to find a courage in themselves that many times they didn't know they had. And that's a remarkable talent. So like I love a Dorothy Cotton, and so suddenly I don't just want to bring her through the book to say, oh, this is, I want to show you her in action.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, speaking about action, I have famously described your book as political butt stuff.
Yeah.
There are some steamy scenes in My Government Means to Kill Me.
Mhm.
Talk to us about why it was important to have like not just on page explicit material, but also like hot, like so, like
Well,
titillating.
because
You know.
I think in ways that therapists and other people can unravel. A lot of times when a book gets steamy in an adult way, people sort of make it bad or torturous or it's mediocre and everybody's unhappy.
Hmm.
And I just think that activity wouldn't have endured and been as popular if it was if most of us weren't having a really good time quite often. And it's one of the benefits of being young and queer.
Right.
It's what you kind of got away from home to do in a lot of ways. And I wanted that. I wanted there to be joy. I mean, the
Yeah.
story inherently taking place during the AIDS epidemic has some very tough and heavy themes. Let this young man have release. It also mirrored. I mean, this I can tell you. So I volunteered at that group home for children who had HIV and AIDS, and I would do that, put them to bed, get on my bike, go to DuPont Circle, and have a great time. And I wasn't always safe about it
Hmm.
because I was young. And there is you're not necessarily the best decision maker. And there's an excitement of the moment. Things sort of get away from you, right? I rolled those dice.
Yeah.
And that's also part of the story. That to have somebody who is an AIDS activist who doesn't necessarily always practice what he preaches or doesn't always follow the strictures of the time is realistic.
Yeah.
I'd also point out, I mean, we just went through, a pandemic, or we're still in a pandemic. And one of the things they told us is stay away from each other. You got to stay away from each other. Turns out human beings aren't good at that. Even if it's the answer, even if it's for their own health. We aren't good at that. That's how strong that is. I kind of think the heterosexual community, for many reasons, but this is one of them, owes the queer community an apology because during the height of the AIDS crisis, they looked at us like it was a matter of willpower. Like, why can't you all just quit with that? Are you animals? It turns out we are creatures of connection, and it doesn't matter what the danger is. We will connect.
I think that's beautiful, and I think for as many of the dumbest people in my life, the stupidest human beings I've ever met are gay men, who have a head of full esteem about like some guy that they are interested in. But like as a whole, the queer community created safety for ourselves. And one of the most incredible things is like when I was learning how to be a young, gay man, condom use was a very big deal, like
Yeah.
in the mid 2000s.
Yeah.
And then as PrEP became available, the conversation changed entirely to STI status, are you on PrEP, like those kind of conversations, and it like the community evolved its notions of what safety means. And how we can, how we can survive as a community. It's not like I feel like if this had happened to straight people, it would become like a religion, like condom use or whatever would be like a prayer book, and it would never change because
Well, I mean, look, they're still stuck on abstinence.
Exactly.
I'm like, guys, there are a lot of ways we can work this out now. But no, I am proud of our community. It's one of the reasons why I also wanted to hit this period. I think of ACT UP and that fight, like I know they didn't stop AIDS in its tracks as they had imagined. I still think of them as one of the most potent, successful grassroots political movements to have ever existed.
Yeah.
With nothing, they brought this disease to the attention of a nation that was quite determined to look away.
Well, and I think political butt stuff is like very over the target because I don't know how you can't not be political. Like if the AIDS crisis had been a crisis of straight white people, the government would have dealt with it like in 18 months. And then if you're
We found a cure to polio,
right.
right? Like we somehow we put it with, what is this? We all got on it. We found a cure.
We put people on the moon when we had like computers that are simpler than what's in my watch.
Yeah.
But like we couldn't do anything for queer people. So I don't know how you couldn't be political, even if you're not like an activist, even if you're not being Trey, because like you're just seeing how the world treats you. You like politics isn't just about going doing a die-in or a speech or a rally. Like politics is the way you live your life based on how community and society treats you. Like every gay person is political in some way, shape, or form, even if they don't know it. And I think like you see all those kinds of characters sprinkled out throughout My Government Means to Kill Me, like Trey, because of that Forrest Gumpy like nature. Trey is meeting and interacting with so many different kinds of people in the 80s. I think you accomplished something really like a snapshot.
Well, there are different ways of being involved as an activist, and I wanted to sort of highlight those. I mean, one is direct service. So that's Angie. You're helping somebody in need. The other is you hit the streets, and that's ACT UP, and you're putting pressure on political leaders, and you're not doing it by setting an appointment to lobby them. You are surprising them. You are making them. You're being confrontational in a way that I think is completely acceptable and necessary. And then the next version of that is people like Bayard, who work the halls of politics, work the halls of our system, and get things that takes longer. Mm-hmm. It can be frustrating, and there's a tension between all of these groups that I also wanted to explore. I mean, I think when we first start telling stories from our community about this time when it was happening, it's us against the government, right? I mean, that's a valid story. I mean, the government was awful. So that's where it's fought. Now that we're further away from it, what I'm sort of interested in are the things that happen inside the family. It's the way we fought with each other and the way we because those things, I mean, for better or worse, that nature among activists who are on the same side but cannot agree as to means and strategy, becoming a circular firing squad. I mean, it's a story as old as time, and it drives me nuts, but it still matters. I'm hoping in this book that what Trey comes to learn, if there is a lesson, is that you need this full spectrum. That people don't negotiate with the people who are lobbying if there aren't people on the street who are scaring them. Somebody's actually got to stay home and take care of people in need. We can't all testify before Congress. I mean, you just got to pick those spots.
Yeah, I mean, I think you accomplished that remarkably well as a lesson, particularly since the book is structured as a series of lessons. Yeah. So let's say me or people in the live have read your book and loved it, and they want to they want to go further. What's some media that you might recommend? Books or movies or museums or anything?
Oh my goodness! I mean, there's certain I mean, I would call them classics, but they are people's lives. Like How to Survive a Plague is something is a documentary people should watch. Sarah Schulman's book is here. Let me see. This book is great this is backwards. Jack Lowry. It Was Vulgar, It Was Beautiful: How AIDS Activists Use Art to Fight the Pandemic. I mean, it's out there. I would say like the full bibliography is in the back of the book, but there's so much, and I think it bears watching because it's almost unbelievable. Like sometimes you're just like, I can't believe we had to have this sort of argument. Like, I'll give you one that might be like, it's not necessarily the weightiest of material, but there's an episode of Designing Women. Do you remember this show?
I know Designing Women. Yeah. I had TBS in the 2000s.
Okay, so this show, I mean, they had an episode where they tackled this, and a character on TV for the other side said, if you ask me, this disease is killing the right kind of people. And they had to confront, I mean, a sitcom, by the way, and they had to confront this. But what gets me about that moment is at the time, not just millions of people, maybe half the country or more would have quietly agreed with that opinion.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it was a very different world. I do sometimes wonder because a lot of people who held those horrible attitudes are still alive, and I just wonder what they tell themselves when they reflect, or do they reflect? You know, I mean, the people who sort of like used to scream at black children trying to integrate schools. What do you think of yourself when you're 70?
Yeah.
What do you think of yourself when the world has clearly moved past that horrible, wretched opinion? Do you tell your grandkids what side you were on? I mean, I think of it now in our times. I'm going, you know, whatever this is, whatever these moments are, you will have to reckon with them, won't you?
I I hope so. I was just DMing with a colleague of mine on TikTok about kind of related stuff, and we were talking about how for conservative minded, both like capital C and small c conservative minded white people on the left and the right, I think that there's a almost an innate desire for like authoritarianism and rules. And if the structure has told you these are the bad people, these are the people that you aren't supposed to like, it's really comfortable to just be like, oh, I don't like those people. Even as everything, and then as everything is changing, it just feels like, oh, well, like these people are rule breakers. Like I'm following the rule of like culture, and so like you can get even more entrenched in your view of like, oh, like they're like, look how awful the world is changing. And I think for some people, like they never have. They must have some kind of encounter at like late at night when they're old and going to sleep. There must be something of like, I can't believe I had that hatred.
I mean, like, at some point, didn't they ever realize that like integrate, like they just were segregationists their entire lives? They had grandchildren who had like friends of color. Like, what did they do?
It's so wild. Well, we're almost out of time. I had one like, I don't know, maybe goofy question that I wanted to ask
Sure.
you. If Trey had a TikTok channel, what kind of content would Trey be making today?
Well, he would follow you. We should start there.
Oh, well, of course. For my romance recommendations, of course.
No. I think he'd be very. I think he's going to be very liberal. Like I plan to revisit Trey.
Oh.
And I can even tell you I want to revisit him at some point. It won't be my next book. My next book, I want to go Hollywood 1950s, 60s. I feel like I can. It's still historical fiction, but I get a bigger cast. But I want to revisit Trey, and by 1992, Larry Kramer has denounced ACT UP because he kind of had a habit of doing that. And one of the things he says is it's being run by lunatics. And I would like Trey to be one of the lunatics.
I love that.
What happens when you really, at that point, because he's quite young when he gets in, when this has been your whole life, and I want to talk about the toll of sort of political action. I mean, there's something quite frightening, and we saw this with Black Lives Matters movement, where a lot of people, it's so stressful, you find them, they die young. Because the burden of that is so hard on the body. So I want to come back to Trey, but I think Trey would be. I think people would find him politically radical now. I mean, I always love politically radical because I'm like, politically radical now is moderate in 30 years.
Yeah.
Guys, you all are coming this direction. Like, look at the flow of history. So.
Yeah. But I mean, you need those people. You need those Treys. You know, you have to have those people pushing the world forward. You know, it doesn't happen by itself.
No, but it comes at a steep cost to them. So I think Trey is a TikToker. He is streaming live from protests. He is disturbing things left, right, and center. I don't think Trey ever comes into the mainstream tent. You know, so he would have been outside the DNC in Chicago protesting.
I love that. I love that you're returning to Trey. I'm excited to see what happened, and also working on a book about Hollywood. That is so much juicy stuff. How do you find the time? How do you find the time to be a dad and a showrunner and then write books?
Can I tell you that I'm afraid of what happens as I move to a third novel? This book, a lot of this got done during the pandemic.
Sure.
Second book, a lot of it got done during the writer's strike. So I don't know what has to happen next for me to write a third book. But I would probably, that I have another book, we're 2 years from this one. I have another book kind of like up and getting ready to get into the process of getting edited. That is probably quicker than it would be had there not been these pauses in life that made the space and the time available.
Well, I hope you're not condemning us to some other like significant economic or social crisis.
Art has costs.
Before I let you go, someone in the audience, a friend of mine, Chris Williams, asked who would play Trey in the movie of the book.
Ooh, I like Justice Smith. I like Jelani Aladdin. Those would be my two.
Okay. Any parting words on the 2-year and 1-day anniversary of My Government Means to Kill Me?
No one's more stunned. I mean, these books come out. You normally get a 6 to 12 week window of attention, and then it's on to the next season of books that come out.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to say that I owe a lot to you and other book talkers. I know sometimes book talkers can get a hard rap, and everybody has their opinions, but I mean, what used to be word of mouth is now this new book talk sphere, and for people, writers of color, queer authors, there aren't a lot of spaces institutionally that will keep our books alive. Yeah. Except I see that happening with book talk, and it matters. I'm sure some days you might be like, God, people feel like maybe they're talking into a void, or they're taking a lot of grief, and is this even worth it? I will tell you it is worth it. There is no way a book like this 2 years later can still get attention. A week and a half ago I was at the San Francisco Public Library because they chose the book for their citywide readathon. I did an event with Andrew Sean Greer, who won the Pulitzer for writing Less. That has happened because this book has stayed in conversation, because book talkers keep finding it during Pride, on World AIDS Day, Black History Month, or just whenever. And they're not afraid to say, I saw this book and I like this book, regardless of the fact that it's not a new release anymore. And that is so important. I mean, I understand why so much attention goes to the new releases, but you're only a new release for a fraction of the time. And our books need support in order to survive. And so thank you to you and other book talkers who've given this book that support.
Well, thank you for writing it. Thank you for sharing Trey's story with the world. I'm sure a lot of people are excited for more stories about Trey in the world. So happy second birthday, and maybe we can do this again on the third birthday. Maybe My Government Means to Kill Me will be even bigger by its third birthday. Who knows? Well, thank you so much for chatting with me today, Rasheed. I hope you have a good rest of your day. What does a Saturday look like for Rasheed Newson these days?
There is a play date this afternoon. I have some writing to do for this feature I'm working on, this action feature with my writing partner TJ, and then Laura Worrell. Wait, her book has got to be here. Oh my goodness! Yes, Laura Worrell. Sweet, Soft, Plenty Rhythm. It's her birthday, and so I'm going to her house for her birthday party this evening.
Well, don't burn the candle on too many ends. And thank you again so much. This was great. Have a good play date.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, and I'm sure we'll be talking again sometime soon.
Yep. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.